Every year, there's reports and encounters of people encountering these strange, feral like people way out of the backwoods of the Appalachian Mountains. A lot of times, these encounters are nothing more than just a fleeting glance at a distance of these people. However, sometimes these people will go into camps, harass hikers, harass campers, steal items from them. And today's story is not one of those stories of just a fleeting glance at a distance. This story is going to trigger all kinds of emotions. It's going to trigger anger, fear, and sadness. But before we get to today's encounter, if you've had an encounter or know a story that you'd like to have shared here on the show, please email me at the link below. If you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And if you haven't done so already, especially if you're a return viewer, please hit that subscribe button. While you're at it, draw back your bow, look down the peep sight, line up the pin, and let one fly at that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. In early 2016, Liam was 26 years old. He was living out in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and he was going through a very rough point of his life. Him and his longtime girlfriend, they had broke up about a month prior, and he was feeling really down. But his best friend's wife was not going to have that at all. She was really trying to lift his spirits and trying to get him back to the person that he was prior to that whole breakup. And she kept telling him that she had a cousin down in Johnson City, Tennessee, that was about his age. She loved all the same outdoor stuff he did, and that she thought that they would make a perfect pair. Now, Liam was not having any of this at all. A relationship was the furthest thing from his mind at this point. But just to appease his friend's wife, he said, you know what, if you invite her up here, I'll meet her, I'll take her out on a date, maybe we'll hit it off. Now, luckily for him, when his buddy's wife did invite her up, they immediately hit it off. He found himself rapidly falling in love with this girl, and he made several trips from Green Bay down to Johnson City just to spend time with her. About 6 months later, he ended up packing up his life in Green Bay. He moved down to Johnson City, and later that year, they actually ended up getting married.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Once they were married, Liam, his wife, along with their 4-year-old coonhound Boss, they would spend every available minute that they could out in the bush, either camping or hiking or fishing, even hunting during the various hunting seasons out in Tennessee. And in late 2017, in December, his wife's cousin, the one that had set them up, her mom, her aunt, along with more female relatives, were going to be going on an all-girls trip up to Alaska on an Alaskan cruise for well over a week. And Liam figured this was the perfect time for him and Boss to head off into the Appalachians and try to bag some hogs. Now, Liam had grown up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He grew up hunting white-tailed deer, but he was very used to hunting deer on more farmland type areas where it's more flat, not really hilly like in the Appalachians. But his favorite weapon of choice to go after whitetail was his compound bow. So ever since he had moved to Tennessee, it had almost been like a dream or a desire of his to try to get a hog up in the Appalachians using a compound bow. Now, he knew that going after a hog with a bow carried with it an inherent danger just because of the way that hogs can react, especially if they're wounded. So he figured that he would bring protection as well. So for that, he was going to be carrying his .45 caliber handgun on his hip just in case he needed to put down a hog real quick, or really just in case they came across anything out there that he would need to have something more than just his bow to protect them from. He spent some time researching online for the best place close to home where he could go for hogs, and on various different forums, it told him that out by Roan Mountain was a very good place, especially if you could locate a creek bottom or something like that you would stand a good chance of getting hogs. There were lots of reports from other hunters in the area saying that they had had success. So that's where he had planned to go. It was about a 40-minute drive from his home. So once his wife had left on her trip, he loaded up all of his stuff into his truck. And on the Friday, when he got home from work, he grabbed Boss, loaded Boss up in the truck, and then they made the 40-minute drive from Johnson City out to Roan Mountain. Once they were out in that general area, he found this old logging road that kind of ran off up into the Appalachian Mountains. So he turned his truck down this road, started making his way down it. He made it about 2.5 miles. He came to a spot where there's this big trees that kind of block the road, and he really could not get past that with his truck. So he figured, you know what, this is as good a place as any to set up camp. So he pulled his truck over to the side, got out, stretched his legs, let Boss out. Boss kind of was running around the truck. Then he decided that, you know what, there's still a couple of hours before it's dark. Maybe we should go scout the area. Let's go take a look, see if we can find a creek bottom somewhere, see if we see any signs of hogs at all. So that's exactly what he did. He grabbed his bow, he grabbed his dog, he hooked Boss up to a lead, and he started making his way up into the Appalachians. They only walked for about a half a mile before they came across this old creek bottom right at the bottom of this valley. And from there, they made their way along this creek bed, looking at the ground, looking at the trees, looking into the woods for any sign at all of a sounder of hogs or even just individual hogs in general. They walked down this creek bed for about a mile when all of a sudden, up ahead of him on the ground, he could see that the ground was all ripped up, and he could see chunks of mud covering the snow. He moved closer, and as soon as he got up to where the ground was all ripped up, he knew exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at a hog wallow. He knew in that moment that he was onto a sounder. There was definitely a sounder in the area. And he figured, you know what? This is where I'm going to hunt tomorrow morning. So he slowly backed away from this wallow, moved his way off to the side, right along this big thicket of brush. And there he popped up his pop-up blind, made sure that his shooting lanes were clear, and then him and Boss made their way back down that creek bed, back to where they had entered it, and then all the way back to the truck. Now, that night, Liam knew that the temperature was going to be dropping fairly dramatically, so he figured, you know what, instead of setting up a tent and camping outside, I'm just going to sleep in the truck with Boss. Then from there, he ended up making a fire. Him and Boss sat around the fire. He made some food, shared it with his dog. He had a couple of beers, and he spent the rest of the evening basically just playing with his dog and sitting around the fire. That night, around 9:30, he climbed into the truck with Boss and settled in to go to sleep. The next morning, he got up at 5:30. He climbed out of his truck. He brought Boss with him. He immediately got his camp stove going, started boiling some water, made some coffee, had some breakfast, and then him and Boss made their way back up into the mountains, back to where he had set that blind up the day before. Once they got to the blind, he unzipped it, he climbed in, he brought Boss in with him, zipped it back up, and then he settled in for the morning's hunt. About a half hour later, it was now that twilight dawn hour where you can see pretty good into the bush. It's that real kind of dark grayish blue type light, and he figured this was a perfect time to let out a piglet in distress call to see if he could call any hogs in the area to him. So he pulled out his piglet call, laid a couple calls out, and almost immediately, not even a minute later, he could hear squealing coming from about 40 yards in front of him in this big thicket of brush, and he knew that these hogs were there and that they were making their way over to him. About a minute later, sure enough, he could see the silhouette of these hogs coming through the brush into that dry creek bed. Now, they were only about 40 yards from him, but he knew that they needed to be just a little bit closer. So he let out another call, and these pigs started moving towards him. Once they were about 30 yards away, he had his bow all ready to draw. He spotted this one boar with this group of sows, so he drew his bow back, aimed, released an arrow right at it. He heard the arrow hit this hog. He heard the hog immediately start to squeal. It turned and started running into the brush, and he immediately knew that he had messed up. His shot was completely off. He did not hit this thing through the chest. He hit further back on the animal, and he knew that he was going to be in for quite a track. And he was kind of dreading this at this point because he knew he was going to be tracking a wounded boar through pretty thick bush, and it made him a little bit nervous. So he figured, you know what, I'm going to let this hog have about an hour, and then I'm going to go pursue it. So that's exactly what he did. He sat there for an hour. An hour later, he unzipped the blind. He made sure that Boss was tight on a lead, and he started making his way out of the blind. Now, he left his bow inside the blind. He figured he was not going to bring his bow with him. If he needed to put this hog down, he was going to use his 45 that was on his hip. So him and Boss started making their way towards that thick pile of brush, and as they got close to it, he looked down into the snow. He saw the blood trail, and he immediately started following that. However, once he got into that thicket of brush, the hog was not there. There was no sign of it at all, except for a blood trail running off through the snow up the side of this one mountain. So he kind of took a breath, knowing that now he's going to be in for a fairly long track, because this thing did not drop, did not lie down very soon after the hit, and he knew that where he had hit it was fairly far back. So he kind of took a breath, and him and Boss made their way through the rest of that thicket up the side of this mountain. He spent the next 2.5 hours tracking this hog as it zigzagged its way through the trees, up the side of this mountain, back down the other side into another valley. After about 2 hours of tracking this thing, he noticed up ahead, he could see that there was this other kind of brush thicket, and there was a lot of sign around this thicket. There was a lot of blood on the snow. So he was figuring this is where that boar had gone down. So he started making his way towards it. He had his hand tight on Boss's lead. He had his 45 in his hand just in case. So he made his way towards this brush thicket, made his way through the brush. He kind of had to move the branches out of the way as he made his way in. And after about 20 yards, there was this bit of an opening. It was about 15 yards wide. And you could see on the far side of this opening, he could see this hog lying partway into the brush. So he started making his way towards it. Once he got up to it, he kind of stopped looking down at this hog because something was immediately off about it. He noticed that this hog was missing both of its hindquarters. Now, these hindquarters were not pulled off or ripped off by something like a predator, like a coyote or a wolf. It appeared that they had been removed with a knife. So as he's standing there looking down at this hog, he notices that there's these human boot prints all around the area. So he immediately is looking at these prints, looking around, and something just did not add up about them at all. So he knelt down, took a real good look at one of these prints, and he realized that there were no tread markings at all in these boot prints. Instead of where the tread markings should be, it almost looked like imprints of hair, as if somebody had covered their boots in an animal pelt or animal hair, and it made no sense to him at all. So he stood up, looked back down at the hog. He noticed up ahead, leading through that brush, he could see those human boot prints going through the brush, and on the ground behind them, there were these two bloody drag marks, as if whoever this was had been pulling those two hind ends behind them as they walked through the bush. At this point, he made sure he had a real tight grip on Boss's lead. He had his 45 out in front of him, and he started making his way through the brush following those boot prints. He only followed them for about 100 yards. He noticed that they went up the side of this mountain up to this one ridge, and at this point he was really second guessing his decision to continue tracking this person because he did not know if they were armed, if they were dangerous, and really how they would react to him following them. But he was incredibly angry because somebody had just taken the best part of his kill. So at this point, he just basically yelled out, "F off, that was my kill, leave me alone." After that, he turned around and started making his way back towards his blind. It took him quite a while to navigate his way through the brush and through the woods all the way back to the blind. And at this point, he was really starting to think, like, should I continue hunting here for the rest of the day? You know, I've already shot a hog, somebody's taken the hindquarters. Or should I go find a different place to hunt? And ultimately, he decided that he was just going to relocate a little bit further down that creek bed and try his luck a little bit closer to the truck. So he packed up his blind, and him and Boss made their way about a half mile back down the creek bed. They set up the blind, got into it, And for the rest of the afternoon, he would periodically let out those piglet distress calls, hoping to bring those hogs back to him. However, for the rest of that day, he did not see any hogs at all. Once evening came, him and Boss, they made their way back to the truck, and just like the night before, he got a fire going, he had some food, spent the evening playing with his dog, he had a couple of beers. Before he went to bed, he made sure that his large saw and his axe were leaning up against the side of his truck. He climbed in, and him and Boss settled in for the night. And just like the morning before, at 5:30, he woke up, he climbed out of the truck, he brought Boss with him, and almost immediately he noticed that Boss was acting very odd. He was not running around the truck like he had done the morning before. He seemed to be very on edge and very alert, and he was just staring off into the bush. Now, Boss was very well trained. Liam had him since a pup. He spent many years hunting with him out of Wisconsin, and just this behavior was not like him at all. He would typically only do that if there was a predator in the area or if there was danger. So immediately, Liam made his way to the truck, grabbed his .45, he put on his thigh holster, stood there for a second just kind of scanning the bush, reached back into the truck, pulled out his lantern, fired it up, and almost immediately he noticed that all around the truck were those same boot prints that he had found up on the side of that mountain, right where his hog had been. And he was immediately kind of like, holy crap, like whoever this was up on the mountain that stole the hindquarters off my hog, they followed us back to the truck. So he immediately started looking around, and he noticed that that big saw and his axe that he had laid up against the side of his truck the night before were gone, and those boot prints were pretty much right in line with it. At this point, Liam did not really know what to do. He didn't know if he should continue going off and having a hunt that day or what. And this entire time, Boss was standing there just staring off into the bush. All of a sudden, Boss's ears perked up. He kind of stiffened up, and then he just booked it into the woods. Liam immediately started calling to him, yelling at him, "Boss, come here, Boss, stop." But Boss just kept running, which was not like him at all. Liam was immediately like, what do I do? My dog's running off into the bush. There was somebody around the truck. How the hell did they not alert Boss this close to the truck? And he didn't know if he should run after him or if he should just keep calling to him. So for the next couple of minutes, he just kept yelling for Boss, yelling for him to come back. And Boss was not coming, which, again, was not like him. He was incredibly good on recall. So at this point, Liam kind of was like, okay, I need to figure out how I'm going to get my dog back. Like, why is Boss not responding to me? So he reached into his truck, he grabbed his Bowie knife, he put that on his belt as well, he drew his .45, and he started making his way into the bush as well. He ended up walking through the bush for about an hour and a half. It was still pitch black. He's kind of making his way through the trees, trying to see whatever he could see. He has a headlamp on, trying to follow Boss's prints in the snow. The whole time he's yelling out to Boss, yelling for him to come. Boss is not coming. He does not hear him barking. He keeps looking around, and he notices that along Boss's trail off to the sides, he could see those same prints in the snow going through the bush as well. At this point, he keeps following Boss's trail. Again, just keeps calling out to his dog, listening for any sign of him whatsoever. As the sun starts to come up, again, it's that gray light he could barely kind of see. He starts to see up ahead of him along the side of this ridge. He makes out these two figures kind of standing up on the side of this ridge, and he stops for a second. He's looking up at them, and he realizes that these figures that he's looking at appear to be two men standing on the side of this ridge looking down at him. He immediately stops, looks up at them, and he just yells out, "Have you seen my dog?" These two figures, as he's looking at them, they just turn around and start making their way further up the side of this ridge. Liam at this point's like, what the hell? Like, I just called out to these guys asking if they see my dog. They didn't respond. They just turned around and started walking. And immediately things started to click in his head. And he's like, I wonder if these guys are the ones that took my hog. I wonder if these are the guys that were around the truck, and I wonder if they have anything to do with Boss running off like this. So at this point now, his heart's racing. He's completely ticked off. He's just full of adrenaline. So he starts sprinting up the side of this ridge right along Boss's trail. Once he gets up to the top, he notices that the tracks go down into that next valley. So he starts making his way down the ridge. He's kind of having to zigzag around trees, kind of pick his route around loose rocks, little rock outcroppings. And as the days start to progress, now it's about another hour later, he still has not found Boss. Again, though, as he's on Boss's trail, on both sides, he sees these human footprints. After about another half an hour, he notices up ahead, he can see something in the snow. He sees this kind of, it just looks off to him. It kind of looks like this reddish brown kind of mound in the snow up ahead of him. So he starts making his way towards it. He has his 45 ready. He does not know what to expect. Once he gets closer, he just notices that it's just a bunch of snow kind of all piled up. Those boot prints are kind of all around it. And he notices that this pile of snow has a real reddish tinge to it. Now, if you're a hunter and you've ever shot a game animal in the bush in the wintertime, you'll know that even one little drop of blood can kind of spread out in the snow, appear to look like more. But this pile of snow looked like it was almost blood-soaked. Like there was quite a bit of blood in this snow. And he immediately started fearing for Boss. He thought that these guys had done something to him and that Boss was buried under this mound of snow. So he immediately just started digging at the snow, really hoping he did not come across Boss's body in here. But as he dug, he noticed that this was just snow. But from there, he did not see any of Boss's prints leading any way away from this, not going off to the side. There was just no sign of Boss's prints at all. At this point, Liam just felt his heart sink, and he just knew that something bad had happened to Boss, but at the same time, there was no body under the snow, so he was really kind of hoping that, maybe he just missed some of Boss's tracks. Parts of the snow weren't very deep. They were kind of covered in leaves and spots. Maybe Boss ran through that. So he spent about the next 2 hours just doing big circles through the brush, trying to find any sign of Boss whatsoever. But he did not come across any other prints. So at this point, feeling just absolutely devastated, he started making his way back to his truck, following Boss's prints going back towards the truck. After walking for about a half an hour, all of a sudden he noticed something off to his right, kind of moving between these trees. So he immediately got his 45 up, he turned, and was watching in that direction, when all of a sudden he realized that what he was looking at was some guy moving through the trees. But this guy looked completely off. He appeared to be wearing what looked like a robe. He had this what looked like animal pelts up on his shoulders, around his legs. And Liam just kept his 45 trained on this guy, watching him move through the trees. And he noticed that he was pulling something behind him that looked almost like a makeshift sled of tree branches and tree limbs kind of wound together, tied together. And there was something on this makeshift sled, but it was covered by what appeared to be, again, almost like an animal pelt. But he could see that it looked like there was almost kind of like a red tinge behind this sled. Immediately, he ended up yelling out to this guy. He yelled, "Stop!" This guy turned, looked directly at him. Now, this guy was only about 60 yards away, so he's not super far, but at the same time, not really close. But this guy turned, looks directly at him, and you can see that this guy has had this long, unkept beard. He just looked very dirty, and this guy was just staring directly at him. And again, he had his 45 trained right on him, and he just yelled out, "What's on your sled?" Because he was thinking in this moment that Boss was on that sled. As soon as he yelled that to this guy just started running almost at an inhuman speed. Nobody should be able to run this fast through the bush. The guy was just sprinting, pulling the sled behind him. And just in a moment of just basically adrenaline rush and fear and anger, Liam just ended up popping a couple of rounds off with his 45 in that guy's general direction, not aiming directly at him, but just shooting kind of in that direction, just almost like a warning and kind of an attempt to get this guy to stop. This guy, though, he just kept running, and after a couple of seconds, Liam just completely lost sight of him behind this, like, just almost impenetrable wall of trees. Liam, at this point, again, just completely devastated. He did not know what to do. He did not know if he should go after this guy. And he was starting to kind of think, like, should I have shot towards this guy? Like, what if this guy's like a trapper? What if this guy is just a hiker? What if he just wanted nothing to do with anybody else? I just shot at him. What if he reports me to the authorities? Like, I'm going to get in crap for discharging a firearm at this guy. I could get charged for, attempted manslaughter or attempted murder for that. So even though he really wanted to keep pursuing to try to figure out what happened to Boss, he just kind of took a breath and continued making his way to the truck. After a few hours, he made his way back to that initial dry creek bed. He made his way past where his blind was. At this point, just because of how he was feeling and everything that had happened, he did not even bother collapsing down his blind. He just continued towards the truck. Once he got to the truck, he made his way towards it, and almost immediately he just stopped, froze, and stared at the hood of his truck. And right on the hood of his truck was Boss's collar. He ended up walking towards it, grabbed it, and he noticed that on Boss's collar there was quite a bit of blood on the collar. And again, just immediately his heart just sank, and he knew now that Boss was gone, and that more than likely whoever that was that he saw in the woods had done something to Boss. And whoever that other person was with that second figure had obviously brought Boss's collar all the way back to the truck. He ended up getting in his truck. He drove home. His heart was just absolutely breaking. Boss was his best friend ever since a pup. Once he got home, he ended up contacting some game wardens. He ended up talking to them, told them exactly what had happened. And the game wardens told him that, you're lucky that you made it out. Sometimes people venture off into these mountains, strange things happen to them, and they're never seen again. So it's really unfortunate what happened to your dog, but just count yourself lucky that you made it out all right. Liam was completely heartbroken, but he really did not want to give up on Boss. So he called up a friend of his, and they spent a couple of days basically going through that entire area looking for any sign of him at all. They did not find any sign of him. They saw no more signs of these people. And Liam, from this day, has just always just felt an incredible sense of guilt for heading out there with Boss and not leaving after they came across the hog. And he spent quite a bit of time looking around online for any explanation of who these people could be. And he really does feel like that these legends, these stories of these feral people in the Appalachian Mountains are true. And he really does feel like that's who he encountered on that trip, and that's who took his dog. And he just warns anybody heading off into the Appalachians just to make sure you have protection, stay alert. If you have a dog, keep it tight on its leash, because he said that these people are not afraid to do anything at all, and they're not afraid to hurt your pets, so just keep a real close eye on them. Well, that's it for today's encounter. This story hit me pretty hard because I have a dog that just absolutely means the world to me. And if anybody ever hurt her, it would just put me into an absolute rage, and I don't even know what I would do, and I don't think anything would be able to protect them. But I'd really like to know your thoughts on this story. Have you ever heard any stories similar to this of these feral people harming pets or going after animals? I know there's lots of stories out there of them going after hikers. I have not heard very many stories, though, of them going after pets. So please leave a comment in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.